Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, with chief focus today on the situation in the Red Sea, where a sixth of the world economy, or seaborne economy, passes through on a daily basis despite the ongoing efforts by the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah to disrupt the freedom of navigation in the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. What's the situation in Syria? Judea and Samaria. A 12-year-old boy was murdered there overnight. We have a long list of issues to focus on, but before that, it's always important to remember how the Iranian belligerent war against Israel began. 433 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip had launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 250 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 100 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, on October 8th of last year, Iran essentially joined the war when it greenlighted its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, Hezbollah launched over 13,000 projectiles towards Israeli territory, and not Hezbollah alone. Additional Iranian proxies have launched from Syria, from Iraq, from Yemen, including Iran proper. But with all of that, let's turn to where we are in today's situation, and I'd like to start with General Doron Gavish. I'd like to ask you to initially focus on the Red Sea, since it seems like Ansar Allah continues to do Iran's bidding, while the other theaters are, of course, more focused on the Syrian theater, which is a distraction for them.
Well, Israel is in a very tight relations. For sure, military is between the IDF and CENTCOM. So this is really every visit is almost it's a regular visits that within them both commanders and the forces are talking about the situation, are talking about how do we deal with it, are talking about how do we look at it for the future and what could be the points that need to be worked on. So, this is something which is continuously happening. Of course, what we've seen in the last few weeks, even less than that, this is something that is changing the environment in the Mediterranean, and there could be a lot of outcomes out of it. And of course, if we are considering and looking and focusing on the Israeli point of view, of course, this is something which is alarming from the defense point of view of Israel, but there are also some opportunities there. So it is very important that Israel would be fully aligned on this with the United States. The other thing that we are all looking at is the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, from one side, we are looking how do we, let's say, organizing the situation, but there is some quietness from a military point of view. But then from Yemen, it is still shooting projectiles toward Israel. Last two of them was this morning, but all along the last few weeks, they are shooting ballistic missiles and UAVs. And this is a threat that probably it's about time now to it should get some intention, which I think now we all have some time to do it. And of course, we can't forget that the Iranians are still there. So when those people are visiting Israel, there is an array of issues that needs to be discussed. But the bottom line is the coordination between Israel, United States, IDF, CENTCOM, very close relations, and I'm sure that it would be even better for the future.
Thank you, General Gavish. Let's now turn to elsewhere in Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Relik Shafir, formerly an Israel Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to immediately ask you, particularly on the Yemeni front. We'll focus on that since there's not too much to talk about, not too many developments on that theater other than the launching of various types of munitions towards maritime shipping in the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the adjacent waterways, alongside additional attacks against Israel, which General Gavish just mentioned. Israel has not reacted to any of those attacks, despite the uptick in deliberate targeting of Israeli territory by this terror group since October. What is Israel waiting for?
Well, the Yemenites are venting Iran's irritation, so to speak, and in that theater, the activities, or at least we should expect, the activities of the Houthis should be taken care of by the U.S. Navy, and perhaps there is some kind of an agreement on who does what about the Houthis. There is an advantage to this theater being active in that it allows us to put pressure on Iran in all kinds of ways and not freeze the situation until the 20th of January at this time. So in a way, we can use the Houthis, I'm talking about politics and statesmanship, as keeping it alive, the fact that there's still a threat, an active threat, almost daily from Iran that should keep everybody on their toes and not to get too complacent. So sometimes things can turn on their heads in that you're using the fact that they're firing, even though what they're firing is a very small threat. But I think that it's a combination of keeping the theater still active and giving us a reason to act in Syria while we are actually in war with Iran actively from Yemen. Otherwise, the whole scenario would be quiet and we would be the only ones attacking in Syria. So I'm not sure that this is the reason, but I'm saying that politically it helps us if they fire every now and then.
If I just may one word, I fully agree with my colleague General Shafir. I will just add that we have to remember that they are also shooting toward Israel ballistic missiles. They shot already 15 of them. The last one was a few days ago. 4 in the last few weeks, each one of them with half a ton of explosive, and we intercepted them all. But if we wouldn't, that could be very arming to Israel. It could happen with Eilat and some other places in Israel. So,
that's why we have General Gavish to take care of those.
But we have to, so, yeah, but General Gavish always says that it is not hermetic, and so we are now on the 100% and very happy for that. But really the essence is that still it's a threat. It's a very serious one. And you're right about the UAVs, but also the ballistic missile. And this is something which can harm us seriously.
I completely agree with both of you. With that being said, the apartment owners of the various structures in central Israel that were struck by those unmanned aerial vehicles of minimal damage with very small explosive devices attached to those UAVs is not very appreciative of this position, irrespective of the strategic significance to what you have both mentioned. With that, I'd like to turn to elsewhere here in Jerusalem, where we're joined by Oli Saschal, the head researcher at the IDSF, or the Bitchonistim, as we call it here in Israel. It's great to see you all. I'd like to ask your opinion on what Israel should do with this issue called Ansar Allah, namely the terror group dominated by the Houthi tribe in Yemen, at a time when the Iranians are indeed in a position where they have no longer an actual answer for the Israeli question, being also very much distracted by the Syrian point.
Absolutely, and I think Israel is now prioritizing the Iranian front above all else. And it's all a matter of cutoff where you cut your losses and where you prioritize your arenas. Because in the end of the day, Israel is conducting a multi-front war. We just had Syria's Bashar al-Assad's regime toppled. Hezbollah, we have a very precarious ceasefire, and with Hamas in Gaza, it's still ongoing. Don't forget Judea and Samaria, where there's still a fire. There was a 12-year-old teenager Jewish boy who was murdered just earlier this morning. So all of the fronts are extremely precarious, and the Yemenite front, I think, is the easiest one to explain to the international community, given the risk to free trade and navigation routes over the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandab Strait. With that being said, we haven't seen the kind of initiative, assertive attitude on the part of the United States and our European allies in the first few months of the war. They were mostly containing, then attacking, empty targets while giving them a 12-hour heads up, followed by more serious and stringent strikes by the United States and its allies. And of course, the Israeli Air Force strikes in Hodeidah port. All these things signal to the rebels in Nasrallah in Yemen that their attacks not bore fruit. But we all know that their priorities are different. They can suffer unspeakable damage and still hold on to the belief that they are, carrying out their commitment to the armed struggle against the kuffar or the heretics. So in that sense, it would be very hard to convince. I think the United States would be better off securing navigation routes in the Red Sea by securing its allies on the other side of the strait in Eastern Africa, strengthen anti-rebel forces in Yemen, but also bear in mind that in the end of the day, military action sometimes is needed to thwart threats, not just preemptive alert, but proactive military action against these forces who endanger the United States and its allies.
Indeed. Well, not to forget that the United States has two active task forces operational in the Red Sea, including 153, which is dubbed since the Houthis started attacking maritime shipping on October 17th of 2023. They called it Prosperity Guardian, with a number of nations, of course, joining this task force from all over the world. There is adjacent to that another task force by the European Union, which is somewhat less effective and more focused on the requirements of insurance companies for European commercial vessels. And alongside that, there is also an active US-led offensive task force or coalition, if you may call it that, that is pretty much spearheaded by the United States alongside Great Britain, with their aircraft utilized to strike at the Houthis in Yemen, alongside assistance by staff officers of countries such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands, and Panama, from all countries. But nonetheless, let's shift our attention to another theater, and that is, you mentioned Judea and Samaria. General Gavish, I'd like to ask you, since there was a deadly terrorist attack in the Route 60, which is called here in Israel the Tunnels Road, just next to the Hadel Junction, in which a abhorrent terrorist opened fire towards a bus packed with people, civilians, all of them, and 3 moderately injured, and 1, unfortunately, casualty, a 12-year-old boy who was killed in this event. This issue is not new, of course, but nonetheless, we're seeing the Iranians making extensive efforts to flood the West Bank with weaponry. They're not as successful as they used to be. Nonetheless, this is an ongoing effort to include also munitions, rockets, and other types of missiles that they are hoping to at least provide the assembly tools to local terror cells to utilize against Israel. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Jonathan, first of all, we all are hugging the family of this young boy that found his death in this terrorist attack. You know, it is interesting to say that the bus driver did some actions that basically saved the life of all the other people in this bus. Very fast drive into one of the point that there are Israeli guards over there, and he's an Israeli Arab. So very interesting situation. But at the end of the day, we have to remember that the threat coming from the terrorists in the West Bank, it is still there. You're right about the Iranians, although we could say that what is happening in Syria, what happened in Lebanon, for sure, this is a huge obstacle from them to be able to continue with their efforts. But unfortunately, the terrorists over there are not only being armed by Iran, there are also other routes for them to arm themselves. This is a war that we have to continue fight against those terrorists in the West Bank to make sure that the terrorist organizations such as the Hamas and others, that their supporters are still there. We have to fight them hard, and this is what Israel, the IDF, the Shin Bet is doing in during the last year, and it would continue. We cannot allow this area of the West Bank to be much more challenging than it is already. We know that this was exactly what the Hamas wanted. Fortunately enough, there is no something like intifada and so on, but still there are some terrorist elements over there, and Israel have to be very strong, and this is what we are doing against the terrorists in this area.
Absolutely. All the while, there are reports of clashes between Palestinian Authority, Fatah, and the Islamist Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Jenin and elsewhere over ongoing disagreements between those factions. But let's shift gears to the Syrian front, since there's much to talk about that. Earlier today, unidentified aircraft, presumably affiliated to Israel, have launched strikes in the vicinity of Damascus. General Shafir, I'd like to hear your take on this, since Israel has launched over 350 sorties over the course of the past 72 hours alone, destroying pretty much all of the strategic tools, or most of the strategic tools, belonging to the Assad regime that were abandoned, of course, and left behind. What should we take out of it?
If you noticed, there had not been any news of casualties within the Syrian forces, either Army, Air Force, or air defenses. The targets are the actual war machine, airplanes, helicopters, ground-to-air missiles, ground-to-ground missiles, Scuds of the different sorts, SS-21s that are pretty lethal, ground-to-ground the missiles. After taking those out, the next level is the maintenance level. Make sure that the maintenance of these airplanes will not be able to be refurbished quickly, and that goes for the munition depots, chemical warfare centers, air defenses, air defense backups, and different logistics, so that these can't be engineered again without massive work that should take a few years. The same goes for the Navy. That leaves the Syrian forces, ground forces, on basic munitions, tanks, small missiles, and personal weapons, so that they can police, but they cannot launch large offensives either in Israel or even on their own people. So that would leave Syria out of the threat game for quite a while, as well as allow us to make sure that the Iranians do not use Syria as a launching pad for Hezbollah. And so we can actually corner off Syria and Lebanon and push the Iranians maybe to northern or center of Iraq, where the Americans have their hands because their bases are pretty close. So pushing the Iranians back east is a major blow to the Iranians. And all these games that we're seeing, if we may call it that, are to end by January 20th. I think everybody understands that these are the rules of the game, and trying to grab as much as possible in that twilight zone that we're talking about.
39 days to go, I assume, but we'll have to wait and see how everything evolves until then. Every war is fluid, and to say that the current forces in Damascus have managed to consolidate their power in Syria is not something we can do at this point in time. Mr. Shaschal, I'd like to ask you, since when we're talking about Syria, we're seeing right now also the forces of Bashar al-Assad who fled the Syrian territory. They fled both to Iraq as well as to Lebanon, saying the war is not over. And we were betrayed by our senior commanders and by Bashar al-Assad, and now we're planning on fighting back, and we're going to do it in all kind of methods in order to push back at the jihadist forces that took control of Damascus. What are we to make out of that?
Absolutely, and we're currently in the post-Assad fever, I would say. This is the sugar high of these jihadists, where they have just taken control over Syria. They couldn't believe it themselves, I believe, and now they are not seeking conflict. They said they have no interest in opening a front with Israel at this point. They are pushing hard against the Kurdish region in eastern Syria, also sworn enemies of the Turkish forces who are backing them up. But ultimately, after this immediate period is over with, Israel will have to ask itself seriously what kind of front will be open up in the north. Netanyahu himself said that we're facing a 7-front war, possibly an 8th front just open up right now. And the thing is that Israel has carried out this week really one of the most astounding operations in its history. It's kind of being meddled away with all the endless news cycle. But come to think of it, more than 1,500 targets that were targeted just this week by the Israeli Air Force and Navy, literally decimating the Syrian army. Now, we cannot even imagine these terms, and nothing like that ever happened in the past 50 years, at least against the conventional army. And so Israel is diminishing, really, or taking off the table any and all military capabilities in Syrian territory that may or may not fall into the hands of jihadists, but also that will not be used by anyone, not smuggled out of the country against Israel. And so these steps, alongside taking the buffer zone in the Syrian Golan, were designated to prevent that scenario. Now, future will tell whether the northern front will also include not just Lebanon in a very high intensity level, but also Syria. Right now, these rebels are focusing internally. They understand that being a wolf in wolf clothing, as they were in their ISIS days, invited an all-out aggression, all-out assault on the part of the United States and its allies, decimating the ISIS caliphate. And now, in their current shape and form, the Tahrir al-Sham, with all the positive-sounding messaging, they understand they need to consolidate their force before they consider their next movements.
I highly doubt they're going to be accepted by the international community, but that's my personal understanding, despite efforts to do so, which is being promoted by a number of countries in the region, which have specific interests to do so. And I think Ayatollah Ali Khamenei referred to one of those countries, not by name, and we'll keep it at that. But we have less than 2 minutes left, so one sentence from each. What are we to focus on for the next 24 hours? General Gavish, we'll start with you.
Well, Jonathan, we have to say that we have to look toward the south. We talked about it more than once, and we say it again and again. We have to still, we still have 100 people under the Hamas organization. So hopefully the deal will be break, because from the military point of view, I think that most of the what had to be achieved was achieved, and now it's the time to move for a deal.
Thank you, General Gavish. General Shafir?
Not only the hostages, but also something bad is cooking down south with the Egyptians, where the chief of staff and his Shabak counterpart who went to speak with the new personnel in Egypt. There's a growing mistrust between Egypt and Israel, which should be taken care of. And our statesmen or politicians should be aware that this needs to be pacified, because we need the Egyptians, and we should make sure that we don't react in a way that forces them or makes them unfriendly towards us.
Indeed. Mr. Issachar?
Yeah, I think the 100 hostages in Gaza are still there, and efforts by the head of Mossad, chief of staff of the military, are being made these days to conclude a deal. We hear the news coming out of the Minister of Defense these days. Still, the conditions are not ripe yet for a deal, but I hope we can work something out. And the Syrian front to consolidate the buffer zone to make sure that the war in Syria does not leak into Israeli territory. All the time, the eyes to the east, Iran's nuclear program and its plans maybe to compensate for its loss in Syria with a breakout to a nuclear weapon. All these things must have a clear-eyed view of the Israeli intelligence and the defense community.
Mr. Issachar, General Shafir, General Gavish, thank you all very much for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.
Shalom, I'm Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy foreign minister and member of Knesset. Today, I'm very privileged to be hosting TV7's Middle East Review and also being a panelist of the various shows of TV7, which I find the most enlightening, most educating if you really want to understand the world, the global scene as well as the regional scene of the Middle East. It is worthwhile to watch TV7.